How's it going, everyone? In this video we are going to be repairing the reverse light wiring harness in this 1991 Honda CRX. The same process applies to the Civics of this era, 1988 to 1991. The issue is that when I put this car in reverse, the reverse lights don't come on, and so on this manual transmission you'll note how there is this reverse light sensor or switch in the transmission, and then this goes into a wiring loom. And on my car, being almost 30 years old, the issue is that the wires, the old wires that used to be in the harness tore after so many years. And so what I did is I came in here with some soldering irons, solder, and a lot of time and patience, and was able to cut up into the wiring harness, get some good wire. There's a green and a yellow wire for this. Now it's black and red because that's what the connector looks like. Bought a bunch of these on Amazon. These things are really cheap, but they're higher quality, and at least they're newer than the old ones. So yeah, got this soldered in, and I'm just putting this up right now, throwing on some electrical tape and some zip ties just to try to keep all this together. And yeah, so this is the part of the wiring harness that you guys can watch me work on throughout this video. It does require taking out the distributor to get better access. And then, yeah, I also did solder this, but I like the electrical tape just to give it some extra protection on the outside. So really happy. Reverse lights are now working. And yeah, we'll stay tuned, and we'll cut to the next scene. The first thing you want to do before you remove this is, if you know this is in time, you're gonna take a little Sharpie and make this notch right here, because if you don't do that and you take this thing out and then when you put it back in, you're not going to know the exact tilt that this thing should have, because when you loosen the 3 mounting screws on this distributor, you will be able to move this backwards and forwards, and that is how you adjust the ignition timing on this thing. So if you don't do that, you're not going to have the timing correct, and if you're in the great state of California, that will be an automatic failure for smog. So you got to make sure that you've got that set, and if you don't do this and you forget, it's all good, because it's going to be good practice to basically check the ignition timing afterwards anyways, just so that you're extra sure that we've got timing set to exactly what the spec should be from the factory. So the only 2 leads you have going into this distributor are going to be these 2, and then there are 3 mounting screws, 1, 2, and the third one is right there. It's kind of hard to get to, but yeah, so once you disconnect these 2 wires, you can just pull this thing out, and we'll cut to that point when we get to it. Alright, if you're like me and you struggle to get these plastic tabs off, the trick that I just did is there's a tiny little Phillips that is mounting a metal bracket here that holds these 2 connectors in place. And so what I did is I took out that screw using a Phillips that's magnetic, because you really don't want to lose that little thing down there. And then that let me get this away from the distributor. And now there are these 2 connectors. When you look at that, you're going to think, oh, I pressed down on that tab, right, to release the connector. The answer is no. Actually, you need to use a little metal pick, and then you pry up on the plastic thing right there. Sorry, it's not focusing. Pry up on that, and then that is able to release the clip that gets the connector removed. So I'm going to try to see if I can show you guys. Now it slides out. So when you lift up on what my thumb is pulling up on, that lets you slip it out to actually disconnect this from the wiring harness. So that's how you get that connector removed. Now I'm going to be trying to remove this guy, and in theory all I need to do is depress that little tab to get this thing free from the middle bracket, but it's not happening for me, so I'm gonna carry on and try to remove the bracket from another thing. So I'm just gonna keep at it, let you guys know what I find there. Alright, so I finally got the other one undone. The trick to this one is inside of the connector to the distributor. I'm trying to show it. There's that little white plastic tab thing that it's just above my thumb. So what you need to do with this is use a little hook and pull up on that white tab again. And then once you do that, there's these little ear things. So you can see one of them's right there on my thumb. The other one's on the other side right there. Once you do that, I used a flathead screwdriver and I came in and then I wedged it like that to pull those two things apart. So while you're lifting up on the little white hat thing, sorry it's hard for you guys to see in here, but that little white hat thing that's right underneath my thumb, pull up on that and then gently use a flathead to wedge these things free from the other housing. And then once you've done that, that's how we successfully disconnect these two from our distributor. So that's the part that I think a lot of people on YouTube usually gloss over. They're just like, oh yeah, disconnect these two things, it's real simple. And then they pull out the 3 screws and they're like, that's it. But yeah, that's how you get it out, the 2 cables. And now we will continue with actually removing the 3 bolts, which is the easy part. Yep. Now, just gonna pull it that way. Just like so. I'll set this guy right there. Alright, just to give a summary of the cabling that's going on in here. I don't know what these all are, but you know, this guy right here is single prong connector, and it just shoves onto that little pin right there in the engine block. Probably has something to do with like timing. There's an additional plug right here. There is a little tab on the bottom side of it that you depress down to then disconnect it. This is the O2 sensor cable. And then there should also be some cabling that runs out to go to the reverse lights, but unfortunately that broke off just from old age on this car, so that's why I'm in here, is I'm going to be trying to get as much of this wiring loom accessible as I can so I can begin to solder on some new wires for these reverse lights. The O2 sensor, I think the original thing that held it onto the engine block or the transmission broke, so this is going to make taking it off a little bit interesting, such as life here. But yeah, I'm going to do the best I can to kind of do a solid repair on this, just because I don't want to keep coming back in here too often. But yeah, so this is the O2 sensor. It's a single wire, and I believe the way you disconnect it, if I can continue rotating this, there should be something on that side where you can depress or pull up and it'll separate from this part of it. So I'm trying to figure out what that looks like. But once I do that, I'll be able to get good access at all this wiring loom and try to put in a good fix. Finally got the oxygen connector disconnected. This one was the hardest one. The way I did it was I used one hand to, like my thumb, just like this, to lift up on this plastic tab really hard. And then the other hand I used to pull this thing out. There's a little plastic hat on it. And so by lifting up with one hand on the tab, you can then use the other hand to pull, and maybe twisting it a little bit side to side just to get this hat thing to clear was able to help me get this finally disconnected. So now we're making some progress here, and I've got the wiring loom that I'm going to be doing a lot of work on in one place right here. Alrighty, and so after gently and carefully cutting back the outer sheathing, trying to keep on as much as I can, I now have the ends of the green and yellow wires that have broken off, and I'm going to be taking out and removing the outer housing of this, trying to clean off the metal as best I can, probably use some ethanol, and then we're going to solder on some new ends to these things so we get some long enough wires that we're able to make it down to the actual reverse lights in there. got as much solder in there as I possibly could, so we've got a nice electrical connection. Turning these things into little hooks really helps when you have absolutely no space like I do, so back definitely hurts from leaning over so much, but really glad that I was able to get some additional wire onto these broken wires in the wiring loom. That looks pretty clean to me. So now I'm going to be focusing on getting that guy, and then also attaching these ends onto the actual connectors so that we can get reverse lights working again. Okay, so after cutting the zip tie, I was able to get the reverse light switch here up a little bit so I can access it easier. Now I just cleaned it off with some ethanol, so I've got a nice clean surface so that when I put on the shrink wrap, it'll sit down nicely and stay tight. Next step here is going to be actually soldering on the actual plug. We're just going to do this guy onto there. The way I've done this is a little bit convoluted, but I'm going to go with red goes to yellow and black goes to green. So yeah, I'm kind of sucking here on the color coordination, but it's as good as I can do. But yeah, so I'm going to get this thing soldered on there, and then we'll solder these two wires onto there, and then we will hopefully have a reverse light. Alrighty guys, so it is finally good. When I put this car in reverse, I now have reverse lights that work, which is awesome. It hasn't been this way for many years, and the reason is not because of burned out reverse lights. It was because of a faulty wire in the wiring harness that I just spent a bunch of time soldering. So this is a reverse light. This is the new connector I just soldered in for that reverse light, and I'm really glad to see that this thing's back up and running. I'm gonna put the distributor back in, and then we'll be able to drive this car around and have working reverse lights. So that is excellent. Yeah, so thank you all for watching.